type of Edenic utopias scattered across the flyover states or whatever. You know, you mentioned the difference between Star Trek and Mad Max, and I couldn't help but really be thinking about like the escape from LA, the escape from New York. When from, you know, I've not been to San Francisco since I was a kid, but you kind of hear at least that it's kind of, I don't even know the word. It's not what it once was, maybe. And what can happen when the stability of elites go out to seek these refuges, and what's left, like what's left in those vestiges of cities. I mean, what becomes of that? And then when you're talking about the strength of these communities, like what was kind of in a apocalyptic vision of the future, it was making me think about Rome and the Gauls, or you know, the barbarians or something that then come and overtake the power of Rome to make that distinction versus you know, creating these places of some kind of strength. But I also heard you talk about that can be done in an apartment complex, or if you can get somebody to have the vision, like a generational vision. And I'm seeing that play. You know, a good friend of mine just moved back home last year because he was listening to stuff online about, and he was in Little Rock. He was in the Arkansas City, a small city, and he was distinguishing between kinship and friendship and the American dream of. He said, my grandfather got the American dream. All his kids went off to college, and he's self-sustaining financially, but he's alone. He's alone up in Missouri because all his kids went off and they're successful. And he's like, I don't want that future for my parents, and I don't want that future. And so he moved back to our little town, and he works remote, so he could do that in a way. And he's grafting back into this community and experiencing the difference between, I'll tell you this, it's a different thing to ask my sister-in-law to pick up my kids from school than it is to ask a friend. I think that it's like that's almost an infinite ask for one of us, for back and forth between me and my brother. Our kids are in the same school. It's like I can just say, hey, something's going on, can you pick up the kids? You don't have that relationship as much in friendship. It's a different kinship. So those are just like the ideas that are going into my head, is just coming from the cities and abandoning the cities, and then there's chaos, but what we're trying to find is home and kinship and a strength. And there's a strength in that type of trust and family that you're talking about as well. I don't know. That's just,
well, maybe the metaphor might be something like I have no idea who your audience is, so I apologize if I'm saying things that make no sense.
I don't have an audience.
Oh, that's convenient. Like carbon bonds. You know, when you're forming molecules, carbon bonds. Some molecules can afford to have like 1, 2, or 3 atoms bonding. 3 bonds like a diamond. It's very strong.
Mm-hmm.
And certain qualities, certain kinds of relationships have an affordance of a possibility of a strength of relationship. Doesn't mean it's necessarily there.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible. You got your kin. And by the way, you've got your kin that you actually were born and raised with, which is stronger than your kin who are distant. Even a first cousin who happens to live across the state and you never actually visit, and that's going to be a very vague relationship.
Right.
Then you got your childhood friends, right? There's something about people who were your friends when you were 5 or 7.
Yes.
You
can't make old friends happen.
You can't. You can have intimacy with people who you meet later, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Because they didn't know you then. It's a different kind of person.
Yes.
It's just things that happen, as you know. And so there's like a natural hierarchy. We can't help it. It's a natural hierarchy. Like your relationship with your parents and your children have more possibility than anything else. God, parents and children, closest friends, close other family. And so that's that. And by the way, that's that. There's nothing we can do about it. Okay, now next piece. And we've been thrown into this crazy world where our currency, like our capitalization on that possibility, is extremely small, either because our kinship relationships are hazardous. The relationship we have with our parents is not a good relationship, even though it in principle could be. It isn't in reality. And the healing of it may not be on the near horizon. Or if we didn't have any good close childhood friends, or if we did, we left them long ago to go to college in faraway eastern or western town. Fill in the blank, right? So we sort of spent the capital frivolously, I would say, on very not interesting things. But nonetheless, we are where we are, right? It's the key.
Yeah.
T0. You're here now.
Right.
What's the best you can do is where you actually are. And the best you can do is to seek places where you have things like, we all actually have our fate is thrown together. Like there's no optionality. And we're going to rise or fall together. So we're staying. Our skin is in the same. We all have skin in the game, and it's the same game. Where we all have a shared sense of the notion of my children and your children are going to potentially get married. But that second order kinship is very powerful. If you'll witness this as your kids get older.
No, I have a 14-year-old. I have a 14-year-old, and she has a friend who's the son of our friends.
Yeah, and so if it begins to be the point, let's say 3 years from now, but they're still friends, and you're going to look at your friends, you're going to be like, we may actually be kin. It feels like we're moving more towards that, and you'll notice a qualitative difference of what happens. Like your willingness to do stuff is going to shift. Like let's have a vacation together. Let's hey, let's have to talk seriously about what this means. Because either way, if you don't talk seriously, then you're very foolish because it's serious.
Right. No, but that's lost. I feel like that's lost too in a certain way.
Oh, it's off the chart lost. Like I was my 5-year-old. I got a 21-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 5-year-old. All girls, by the way.
Okay.
And so our neighbors down the road, like I mentioned, their daughter got married, and the groom did the old-fashioned thing. He actually went and talked with dad about if he had permission, like what are and it was not like a one-day thing. It was actually, okay, we're gonna have this conversation over a period of time to see, is this right for you and for my daughter? Well, maybe not, maybe the opposite, or for my daughter and for you. So my daughter got to be witness to that. So we were talking about it, and we were already at 5. Like, what does it look like? What does a proper man look like? How do you know? What are the questions that you should be asking? I certainly will be asking. So yeah, we've lost a lot. And by the way, in this like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, we threw out a baby. We threw out a lot of baby. The American dream was not a catastrophic error, but there's a lot of error. Goodness. And we're just going to have to crawl our way back. We're going to have to rebuild that stuff.
I feel like, that's what
and just build, focus on. Yeah, go ahead.
That's where I want to, that's such a, there was another point in the Aubrey Marcus podcast where you talked about new people having a vision for their future. And it was an inspiring point. I can't nail it down completely in this moment, but like that vision for the future it's big, but it kind of hits back onto this, Peterson's trying to popularize the idea of subsidiarity. And that seems to be like, that's the project of this ground up. Like, why spend all your time, thinking that every 4 years a vote's going to fix everything?
At a political level, for sure.
And I'm not saying don't be involved in anything, but there's that emphasis. That's the emphasis in our culture. It's not this thing down here.
Right. And the consequences are profoundly negative in lots of different ways. Because it puts all at stake. It creates this polarizing, both sides increasingly realize somewhat accurately that if they lose big. And so therefore they have to fight big. And then there's more and more and more. And that won't last. Here's a key thing. That won't last. It's not like a matter of should we do X? It didn't matter. That's going to break. And it's going to break back. The more intense it gets, when it breaks, the break's going to be worse. So the sooner and more elegantly we can move energy and power and responsibility or strength, power into strength down, the better for everybody in every way. But Peterson actually hits on this too. It starts at integrity, right? It starts at the center of you.
Yes.
And then it works. So the right way of doing subsidiarity is at a political level, we want to move power and responsibility down deeper. but we actually also want to subordinate the political to the personal.
Yes.
And that's another key move that you will, and it's a need to make. And so the mandate to individuals is come into integrity with yourself, which you've talked about, like you had an experience of, what you said, say failures or disasters or bad experiences, roughness, and then have had to come through the process of confession, healing. Right?
Yes.
Confession, healing. Much of it can be directed to God. Much of it has to be to other people.
Yes. 100. Yes. Thank
100%.
you.
Much of it has to be to yourself, right? You have to actually
Yes.
acknowledge stuff to and with yourself.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing, by the way. It's like, yeah, I'm a mess, and it's okay that I'm a mess, but we're working on it, something like that.
Mm.
We're working with Christ, so we got a good. We're held strong, and as long as we just keep moving in that direction, we can be confident we're going in the right way, and then in fact we'll get there, which is pretty interesting to hold that as a key premise.
Yeah, it is. It's hopeful.
Yeah.
It's hopeful.
It's hopeful. It's true. It's like that deep, capital H, hopeful, and true, which is also nice. And then, of course, as that happens, if you do it right, you can't help but begin the process of then expanding that out to other people. Speaking of which, I'm about it. Eloise? No. What am I doing? I got to leave pretty soon. So let me just wrap this up. Yeah. And then that kind of thing just begins the process. And none of this is easy. All of it's actually maximal. The word suffering is right. But suffering isn't meaningless. Suffering is bad. Meaningful suffering is what we're here for.
Mm.
It grows. Right? You're going to start doing these things. It's funny. I've noticed now that when I'm in a relationship with people in my community and I see that they are on this path, and of course I realize that my job is to figure out how to help them in that, in a very gentle way, and as invited, but also to hold them to what they've said. Like, okay, you made these commitments. I've noticed you're not living up to your commitments as far as I can tell. It feels to me like you're off the path. Is there any way I can help you get back on it? Think about how powerful community is that has that at its center. And that's how we talk about building strength, by the way. That building a strength that comes through that process from the center out, coming through and expanding and going through these transformations, and things will shift. And okay, last piece. I just wanted to throw something out there because I feel this is like a nice piece of encouragement. I would like to do a transform on the notion of elite.
On the notion of what?
Elite.
Okay.
Elite, because you said something, and I think this is right, but about an old-fashioned notion of elites as they leave the cities. But I'm going to make two different. I'm going to redefine the concept. Mm-hmm. One, those who feel the call that we're talking about and heed that call, that's the elite. Mm. It doesn't matter who you were before in any context. You could be as lowly as you want to be. If you hear the call and you heed this call, then you are the elite, full stop. And then the second, to heed this call means that you are the one who is participating in finding and then contributing to the strength of a real community somewhere. And that's the answer to the question of this corruption. The places where there are no elites in the way that I'm just describing them, they are going to decay. They are going to fall apart. But there are many, many kernels spread throughout the whole world where there's a few people, a few elites, and they will hold redoubts of truth and redoubts of wholesomeness. And then other elites, exactly again, notice I'm holding on that definition because we're going to own it now. We own that term now. As of this moment, we own it. It's ours. Right? Those elites who seek those redoubts will find them and we'll begin to add to them. Now, this can be a perilous journey. It may be that a particular place is not yours to be. But when you go there, you'll give something and you'll take something and it'll become more and you'll become more and then you'll move on. And I tell you what, you may already be in your proper place, and that's good. But if anybody happens to hear this and they're on their journey, my experience was I went to many places that are real places. They are redoubts of this new possibility. And there are people there who are elites in this sense, but they weren't my place. Well, fair enough. I can be friends. I could be an ambassador. Create trade relationships. We can maybe trade young people in the fullness of time.